Participation in many physical activities demands the health of the cardiac, vascular, and respiratory systems and is related to endurance level, largely because training that improves endurance makes these systems more efficient. Cardiorespiratory endurance has the greatest implications for lifelong health. Studies conducted in the 2000s began to detect a worldwide trend toward reduced fitness in children. A high percentage of children and teenagers already exhibit one or more of the risk factors for coronary heart disease, and far too many are obese. Our bodies meet the differing demands of brief, intense activity and of longer, more moderate activity with different physiological responses. During a brief period, such as 10 seconds of intense activity, the body responds by depleting local reserves of oxygen and sources of energy stored in the muscles. These are anaerobic or without oxygen systems. Anaerobic systems performance can be reflected in measurements of anaerobic power and anaerobic capacity. As the period of exercise demand grows longer, respiration and circulation increase to bring oxygen to the muscles. 90 seconds into an exercise bout, anaerobic and aerobic or with oxygen energy systems contribute about equally. After 3 minutes, aerobic processes meet the demands of the exercise. At any age, anaerobic performance is related to fat-free muscle mass and muscle size, the ability to metabolize fuel, and the quick mobilization of oxygen. Some of these factors change as a person grows. Young children have smaller absolute quantities of energy reserves than adults do because they have less muscle mass. As children grow, their muscle mass increases. Mean and peak anaerobic power improve steadily. Total work output scores improve over the entire adolescent period in boys, but only until puberty in girls. Neuromuscular coordination and skill contribute to improved anaerobic performance as children grow older. Many mature children can be expected to show better anaerobic performance than less mature children, even if they are similar in body size. Children have higher peak power and mean power measures after training than do untrained counterparts. Differences between trained and untrained youths reflect numerous factors such as length of training, increased muscle mass, and neurological adaptations. Once individuals attain adult body size, their anaerobic performance remains stable throughout young adulthood. Starting at the age of 35 years, anaerobic capacity declines 6% to 8% per decade until approximately 70 years of age. Anaerobic performance is related to a large number of factors in adults, including muscle mass and fiber type, gender, and training. Muscle mass declines and type 2 muscle fiber types atrophy with aging in both non-training and trained adults. Although both men and women decline more sharply after age 70, women decline significantly faster. Macready's, Heigenhauser, and Jones in 1990 had sedentary 60 to 70-year-old men engage in high-intensity endurance training and noted an increase in work output during a 30-second anaerobic capacity test. Resistance training to increase muscle mass appears to be important for improving anaerobic performance in adulthood and older adulthood. Unlike in short-term exercise, the energy for prolonged exercise is derived from aerobic systems, the oxidative breakdown of food stores. The success with which we meet the needs of prolonged activity can be indicated by aerobic power and aerobic capacity. Prolonged activity depends on the transportation of sufficient oxygen delivered through increases in heart rate and respiratory rate, cardiac output, and oxygen uptake. The body achieves this increased cardiac output through increased heart rate or increased stroke volume. The limiting factor to continued vigorous activity is the heart's ability to pump enough blood to meet the oxygen needs of the working muscles. When individuals engage in heavy activity, their heart rates increase. Fit individuals regain their resting heart rates more quickly than unfit individuals. How do children respond physiologically to prolonged activity? Their cardiac output is less than adults, and children have a smaller stroke volume, reflecting their smaller hearts. Children also have lower blood hemoglobin concentrations than do adults. Hemoglobin concentration is related to the blood's ability to carry oxygen. Children can extract relatively more of the oxygen circulating to the active muscles than adults can because of less peripheral perfusion. Therefore, the result is a comparably effective oxygen transport system. As children grow, their hypokinetic circulation is gradually reduced, and their response becomes increasingly similar to the adult response. Absolute peak oxygen uptake, or peak VO2, increases linearly in children throughout childhood and adolescence. Peak VO2 and body mass are strongly correlated, and peak oxygen uptake is the most common measure of fitness for endurance activities. Researchers have divided peak VO2 by body mass, yielding a ratio. As figure 10.2b shows, peak VO2 relative to body weight stays about the same throughout childhood and adolescence in boys. It declines in girls, probably because adipose fat increases. Body mass tends to increase slightly faster than peak VO2 around puberty. Two adolescents identical in size could differ in peak VO2 if one was more physiologically mature than the other. With body growth comes increase in lung volume, heart and stroke volume, total hemoglobin, and lean body mass, and subsequently improved exercise capacity. Evaluations of exercise capacity among children should relate to body size rather than chronological age alone. Exercise capacity is also related to maturation state. Each child's unique size and maturity level should be considered when establishing expectations for endurance performance. After puberty, boys on average attain a considerable edge over girls. Women are similar to men in peak VO2 per kilogram of fat-free body mass, but when adipose tissue is included, women have a lower peak VO2. Women also tend to have lower hemoglobin concentrations than do men. It would not be surprising to find that a well-trained woman has a higher peak VO2 than a sedentary man. An adult improves peak VO2 by training at least 3 times a week for at least 20 minutes at an intensity of 60% to 90% of maximum heart rate. Stroke volume increases. Oxygen is better extracted from the blood at the muscle sites. To assess children and adolescents, researchers must distinguish any increase in peak VO2 due to growth from that due to training. A group that contains many early matures can certainly bias an investigation of training effects. Early studies of aerobic training in prepubescent children were equivocal. Until the results of the hormones that initiate puberty are realized, the effects of aerobic training on peak VO2 are minimal at best. Intensity of training appears to be a major consideration in explaining the mixed results of early studies. Studies using a sufficiently intense training program show an increase in peak VO2 regardless of age, stage of maturation, or sex. More research is needed on the intensity of training and the types of training programs required to improve peak VO2 in children. Adolescents after puberty respond to aerobic training much as adults do. Heart size and volume, total blood volume, total hemoglobin, stroke volume, and maximal cardiac output all increase in adolescents who train, whereas submaximal heart rate for a given level of exercise decreases. A sedentary lifestyle is associated with poor aerobic fitness. Endurance training greatly improves it. Average maximal oxygen uptake per kilogram of body weight peaks in the 20s, then decreases throughout the adult years. The loss is approximately 1% per year of life. Cardiovascular function is related to the structure of the heart and blood vessels. The major structural changes in a non-diseased heart with aging include a progressive loss of cardiac muscle, a loss of elasticity in cardiac muscle fibers, and a thickening of the left ventricular wall. The effects of these structural changes on cardiovascular function are numerous. Maximum heart rate. The maximum achievable heart rate with physical exertion gradually declines with aging. Stroke volume. The stroke volume of older adults may or may not decline with aging. Researchers whose studies include participants with undetected disease may find a decrease. Cardiac output is much higher in adults who train aerobically than in sedentary adults. A lifestyle that includes regular physical activity is associated with lower systolic blood pressure. Peripheral blood flow is apparently well maintained in older adulthood. Hemoglobin is also maintained in older adulthood. Elasticity of the lung tissue and chest walls declines with aging. Adults expend more effort in breathing than young adults. Of interest is the lung volume, especially the volume termed force vital capacity. Because the greatest part of oxygen diffusion to the capillaries takes place at the alveoli, better alveolar ventilation contributes to increased amounts of oxygen circulating in the blood and reaching the working muscles. A decreased vital capacity with aging is well established. The loss is more dramatic in smokers than in non-smokers. The pulmonary systems of older adults do well at rest and during moderate activity. The decline in peak VO2 is probably related to the loss of muscle mass and the ability of muscles to utilize oxygen, as well as to cardiovascular and respiratory changes. Maintenance of muscle mass is a factor in minimizing the loss of endurance performance. The addition of adipose tissue with aging works against maintenance of peak VO2. Maximum exercise capacity and peak VO2 decline as an adult ages, and the recovery period after vigorous activity lengthens. A lifetime of negative environmental factors can contribute to or accelerate accelerate the changes. Conversely, a lifetime of exposure to positive environmental factors such as healthful exercise can maintain endurance levels. Peak VO2 declines with aging, even in those who train, yet training and active adults have higher peak VO2 values than do sedentary adults. Evidence exists that declines are not as dramatic in older adults who remain active as in those who become sedentary. Figure 10.5b shows that the decline in peak VO2 is steeper in inactive than active adults with advancing age. Vigorous training can keep peak VO2 steady for a time in older adults. Prolonged training can sharply reduce the decline in peak VO2. Even low-intensity training can be very effective for older adults early in their exercise programs. Inactive older adults taking up aerobic training also improve in other strength and mobility tasks. Training maintains or improves muscle mass, and more muscle mass is associated with higher peak VO2. Fit older adults also have larger vital capacity than sedentary older adults. Older adults with cardiovascular disease should participate in programs designed specifically for this population. The guiding principle is a gradual increase in exercise intensity and duration. Lifelong endurance athletes have a significantly higher aerobic capacity and a higher final workload. This hints that lifelong endurance exercise has a positive influence on endurance levels in older adulthood. Regular activity in youth has positive lifelong benefits. Promoting an active lifestyle among children and youths could dispose them to be more active as adults. People maintain or improve endurance if they are currently training for endurance. Conversely, endurance capacity decreases when people discontinue their training programs. An individual can increase endurance by training, although the effects are transitory. A person must maintain training in order to preserve higher levels of endurance and reap the associated benefits.